My name is Margaret, and I'm 72 years old. I've learned that when you reach my age, people expect you to be gentle, accommodating, the kind of grandmother who bakes cookies and keeps quiet during family disputes. They're about to learn they've been wrong about me. 23 years ago, my world changed forever when my younger sister Linda and her husband Robert died in a car accident, leaving behind their 6-month-old daughter, Sophia. I was 49 then, my own children grown and starting families of their own. My husband George and I thought our child-rearing days were behind us. We were wrong about that too. Margaret, we need to talk about arrangements for the baby, my older brother Frank had said at Linda's funeral, his voice carrying that particular tone men use when they think they're being practical about emotional situations. What arrangements? I'd asked, though I already knew where this conversation was heading. Well, she'll need to be placed somewhere. There are agencies that handle these situations. Good families looking to adopt. I looked across the funeral home at Sophia, sleeping peacefully in her carrier, completely unaware that she'd just lost everything. She had Linda's dark curls and Robert's stubborn chin, and when she'd cried earlier, I'd been the only one who could calm her down. She already has a family, I said quietly. Margaret, you're nearly 50. George is 53. You can't seriously be thinking about raising another child at your age. I'm not thinking about it, Frank. I've decided. That conversation happened in whispers during the reception after Linda's funeral, but the reverberations lasted for months. Some family members thought George and I were being impulsive, taking on more than we could handle. Others worried about the financial burden, the lifestyle changes, the simple reality that raising a child in your 50s is different from raising children in your 20s. I didn't care what anyone thought. Sophia was family. She belonged with us. The adoption process was straightforward since Linda and Robert had named us as guardians in their wills. By Sophia's first birthday, she was legally our daughter, and by her second birthday, she was calling us Mama and Papa. George took to fatherhood again like he'd never stopped, reading her bedtime stories and teaching her to ride a bike in the same patient way he'd taught our biological children decades earlier. She's lucky to have you, people would say, usually with that particular tone that suggested they thought we were being charitable. They had it backwards. We were the lucky ones. Sophia grew up knowing she was adopted. We'd never hidden that from her. We kept photos of Linda and Robert in her room, told her stories about her birth parents, made sure she understood that she'd been loved by 4 parents, not just 2. Why did they have to die? She asked me once when she was 7, sitting on my lap after a particularly difficult day at school. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes terrible things happen that don't make any sense. But if they hadn't died, I wouldn't live with you and Papa. That's true. She was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the serious concentration that 7-year-olds bring to life's big questions. I'm sad they died, she said finally. But I'm happy I got to be your little girl. Me too, baby, me too. Our biological children, David, Michael, and Jennifer, accepted Sophia immediately and completely. She wasn't their half-sister or stepsister or adopted sister. She was just their sister, the baby who joined the family when they were teenagers and young adults, who they spoiled and protected and included in everything. David was 21 when Sophia came to us, already married to his college girlfriend Karen and starting his career in accounting. Michael was 19, finishing his sophomore year of college. Jennifer was 17, a senior in high school who suddenly found herself with a baby sister she adored. It's like having a real-life doll, Jennifer used to say, carrying Sophia around the house and teaching her words and songs. She's not a doll, Jen, Michael would remind her. She's our sister. Our sister who happens to be adorable. The family dynamics shifted, as they do when new people join the mix, but they shifted in beautiful ways. Sunday dinners became livelier with a toddler running around. Holidays were more magical when seen through Sophia's eyes. Even our extended family gatherings improved. There's something about a baby that brings out the best in people, that reminds everyone what really matters. For the first few years anyway. As Sophia grew older, and as our biological children started having children of their own, Some relatives began making distinctions that hadn't existed when she was small and cute and non-threatening. "Well, of course Margaret spoils Sophia," I overheard my sister-in-law Carol saying at Michael's wedding when Sophia was 8. "She's her favorite because she's the one she got to baby." "Sophia's not spoiled," my daughter Jennifer had responded sharply. "And Mom doesn't have favorites." "Oh, please, look at the dress Margaret bought her for this wedding. That's a $200 dress on an 8-year-old. It's her brother's wedding. She should look nice." "Her brother," Carol had repeated, and something in her tone made it clear she didn't consider the relationship quite that simple. I'd intervened before that conversation could go any further, but it was the first time I'd heard someone in our family question Sophia's place in it. It wouldn't be the last. By the time Sophia reached high school, she was stunning in the way that some teenagers are, all long legs and dark hair and the kind of natural confidence that comes from being loved unconditionally. She was smart, funny, popular with her classmates, and completely secure in her identity as our daughter. "Mom, Jessica's mom asked me again if I was really your daughter," she told me one afternoon when she was 16, rolling her eyes as she raided the refrigerator for her after-school snack. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I was really, legally, and completely your daughter, and if she had any other questions about my family tree, she could call you directly." I smiled despite my irritation at Jessica's mother. "That sounds about right. It's so weird how some people get about adoption. Like, do they think you're going to give me back or something? Some people just don't understand that families can be built in different ways." "Their loss," Sophia said, stealing a piece of cheese from the block I was cutting for dinner. "I got the best parents in the world." She was starting her senior year when George had his first heart attack. It was mild as heart attacks go, but it was a wake-up call for all of us. George was 70 by then. I was 67, and we were suddenly confronted with the reality that we might not be around to see Sophia through all the milestones we'd planned to share with her. "What happens to Sophia if something happens to us?" George asked me one evening as we sat in his hospital room, watching our youngest daughter sleep in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, where she'd insisted on spending the night. "Nothing's going to happen to us. Margaret, we need to be realistic. We're not young. We need to make sure she's taken care of." We'd updated our wills years earlier to make sure Sophia would be provided for, but George was talking about more than money. He was talking about family, about making sure she'd have people who loved her and supported her, even after we were gone. "David and Karen would take her in a heartbeat," I said. "I know, but David's got his own kids now, his own life. And Sophia's almost 18 anyway. She'll be in college soon." "She'll always be our daughter, George. And she'll always be David and Michael and Jennifer's sister." "I hope so, but things change when the older generation dies. Sometimes families drift apart." "Not our family." George squeezed my hand. "Promise me something. Promise me you'll make sure the kids understand how important it is that they look out for each other. All of them, including Sophia." "I promise." George recovered from that heart attack and lived 6 more healthy years, long enough to see Sophia graduate high school as valedictorian, get accepted to Northwestern University with a full academic scholarship, and start her sophomore year as a pre-med student. He died peacefully in his sleep on a Tuesday morning in October, and I became a widow at 73 with a 20-year-old daughter who still needed her parents. "Mama, what are we going to do?" Sophia had sobbed at the funeral, and I realized that despite being in college, despite being legally an adult, she was still my little girl who needed to know that someone would take care of her. "We're going to take care of each other," I told her. "That's what families do." The next 3 years were an adjustment for both of us. Sophia finished college and got accepted to medical school. I learned to live alone for the first time in my adult life, rattling around in a house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. But we stayed close. Sophia called me every day, visited every weekend she could manage, included me in her decisions about medical school and career plans, and the young man she'd started dating seriously. "I want you to meet Derek," she told me over dinner one Sunday evening. "I think he might be the one." "The one what?" "The one I marry, Mama. Don't be obtuse." Derek turned out to be a nice young man from a good family, finishing his residency in pediatrics, while Sophia completed her second year of medical school. They'd met in the hospital where they both worked, bonded over their shared passion for helping children, and fallen in love over late-night study sessions and stolen moments between rotations. "He makes me laugh," Sophia told me. "Even when I'm exhausted and stressed and convinced I'm never going to pass my exams, he can make me laugh. That's important in a marriage." "Did Papa make you laugh?" "Every day for 43 years. Derek proposed on Sophia's 24th birthday, in the same restaurant where George had proposed to me 34 years earlier. When they called to tell me the news, I cried happy tears for the first time since George's funeral. "We want to have the wedding next spring," Sophia said. "Something small, just family and close friends." "Whatever you want, sweetheart, I'll help with whatever you need. Actually, I was hoping you'd help me plan the whole thing. I don't know anything about weddings, and Derek's mother is. Well, she's nice, but she has very specific ideas about what a wedding should look like." "What kinds of ideas?" "Expensive ideas. She wants us to invite 300 people to a country club reception with an 8-course dinner and a full orchestra." "And you want?" "Something smaller, more personal. Maybe in the backyard of the house where I grew up." We spent the next 6 months planning what turned out to be the perfect wedding. 40 guests, ceremony in our backyard under the oak tree that George had planted when David was born, reception in the living room where Sophia had taken her first steps, and celebrated every birthday since she was 6 months old. Derek's mother, Patricia, was politely horrified by the modest scale of everything. "It's so intimate," she said when she arrived the morning of the wedding, looking around our middle-class suburban home like she was visiting a historical curiosity. "That's what we were going for," I replied. "Don't you think Sophia deserves something more elaborate, more befitting of her education and social position?" "I think Sophia deserves exactly what she wants." Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Well, I suppose different families have different traditions." Different families. The phrase stuck with me, though I couldn't say exactly why. The wedding was beautiful despite Patricia's obvious disapproval. Sophia looked radiant in a simple white dress that had belonged to my mother. Derek cried during his vows, and our backyard was filled with laughter and love and the kind of joy that money can't buy. "Thank you, Mama," Sophia whispered during our mother-daughter dance. "For everything, for raising me, for loving me, for giving me a family. Thank you for being my daughter. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." That was 2 years ago. 2 years of watching Sophia build her new life with Derek, finish medical school, start her residency. 2 years of Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations and the comfortable rhythms of a family that had weathered loss and change and emerged stronger. 2 years of Patricia making increasingly pointed comments about family traditions, bloodlines, and what she considered the real relationships within our extended family structure. I should have seen what was coming. I should have recognized the warning signs, the subtle ways that Patricia was trying to redefine the boundaries of our family to exclude the daughter I'd raised and loved for 23 years. But I was 72 and tired and still missing George, and I made the mistake of thinking that love and history and 2 decades of shared memories would be enough to protect Sophia from the kind of cruelty that masquerades as honesty. I was wrong about that too. Chapter 2. The Thanksgiving That Changed Everything. Thanksgiving 2023 was supposed to be like every other Thanksgiving we'd celebrated since Sophia joined our family. Everyone would come to my house, we'd eat too much food, the men would fall asleep watching football, and the women would do the dishes while catching up on family gossip. Simple, traditional, predictable. I should have known that Patricia wouldn't let anything stay simple for long. "Mom, are you sure you don't want us to host this year?" David had asked me the week before, calling from his office during his lunch break. "Karen's been saying the house feels small when everyone's here, and we've got that new dining room table that seats 12. "I can seat 12 people just fine," I replied, perhaps a bit more sharply than necessary. "I've been hosting Thanksgiving for 30 years. I think I can manage one more." I didn't mean it like that. I just thought maybe you'd want a break from all the cooking and cleaning. What I want is to have my family in my home for Thanksgiving, the same as we do every year. There was a pause on David's end of the line. Okay, Mom, whatever you want. But I could hear something in his voice. A reluctance, maybe, or a resignation that suggested he knew something I didn't. I spent the week before Thanksgiving in a frenzy of preparation. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, polished the good china that only came out for holidays, and cooked enough food to feed an army. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, sweet potato pie, pumpkin pie, and the dinner rolls that George used to say were worth the entire meal by themselves. Mama, you're going overboard, Sophia said when she arrived Wednesday evening to help with last-minute preparations. She was finishing her first year of residency and looked exhausted, but she'd insisted on coming early to help. There's no such thing as going overboard for Thanksgiving. There is when you're 72 and trying to cook for 15 people by yourself. 14 people? Patricia said Derek's sister couldn't make it. Still too many people for you to cook for alone. But I loved it. I loved the controlled chaos of preparing a feast, loved the anticipation of filling my house with family, loved carrying on the traditions that George and I had established when our children were small. What I didn't love was the phone call I received Thursday morning while I was basting the turkey. Margaret, it's Patricia. I wanted to talk to you about the seating arrangements for today. The seating arrangements. Yes, I've been thinking about it, and I believe the family should sit together at the main table, with friends and extended family at the smaller table in the living room. I paused, my basting brush halfway to the turkey. Patricia, everyone is family. Well, yes, of course, but you know what I mean. The blood relatives should sit together. The blood relatives. My stomach clenched, but I kept my voice steady. I'm not sure I do know what you mean. I mean David and Karen and their children, Michael and Jennifer and their spouses and children. The direct descendants. It just makes sense to seat them together. And where exactly do you think Sophia should sit? There was a pause, and I could practically hear Patricia choosing her words carefully. Sophia is wonderful, of course, but she's not technically part of the direct family line. I thought she'd be more comfortable with Derek's extended family at the second table. Sophia is my daughter. Your adopted daughter, yes, but when it comes to family traditions and formal occasions like this, I think it's important to maintain proper distinctions. I set down the basting brush and gripped the phone tighter. Proper distinctions. Margaret, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to be hurtful. I'm simply suggesting that we organize the seating in a way that reflects the actual family relationships. The actual family relationship is that Sophia is my daughter and David's sister, and has been part of this family for 23 years. She's been part of your household for 23 years. That's not quite the same thing. I hung up on her. I stood in my kitchen, shaking with rage, staring at the turkey that suddenly seemed too big, too elaborate, too much effort for people who thought my daughter didn't deserve a seat at her own family's table. The doorbell rang at exactly noon. David and Karen arrived first with their 3 children, followed closely by Michael and his wife Lisa with their twin boys. Jennifer came with her husband Paul and their teenage daughter Emma. Everyone was laughing and talking and carrying covered dishes and wine bottles, filling my house with the kind of noise and chaos that I'd always associated with holidays. Grandma Margaret, David's youngest, 6-year-old Tommy, launched himself at my legs with the enthusiasm that only small children can muster. We brought the green bean casserole you like. And I brought wine, Karen said, kissing my cheek. Lots and lots of wine. We're going to need it, I muttered, but I was smiling despite my earlier conversation with Patricia. Sophia and Derek arrived 20 minutes later, and I watched Patricia's face carefully as they walked through the door. She smiled and greeted them warmly, but I could see the calculation in her eyes, the way she was already planning her next move. The house looks beautiful, Mrs. Summers, Derek said, admiring the autumn decorations that Sophia and I had put up the day before. You've outdone yourself. She always does, Sophia said, hanging up their coats in the front closet. Mama, what can I do to help? Just be yourself, sweetheart. That's all I need. We spent the next hour in the comfortable chaos of a large family gathering. Children ran through the house, adults caught up on each other's lives, and everyone helped with last-minute food preparations. It felt normal, festive, exactly like every other Thanksgiving we'd celebrated together. I should have known it wouldn't last. Margaret, Patricia said, appearing at my elbow as I carved the turkey. About the seating arrangements. Everyone sits where they always sit, I said without looking up from the carving board. But I thought we discussed. We didn't discuss anything. You made a suggestion, and I rejected it. Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. I really think it would be better if... Mom, do you need help with anything? Sophia appeared beside us, clearly sensing the tension even if she couldn't hear the conversation. No, sweetheart. Your mother-in-law and I were just finishing our discussion about dinner. Patricia's smile was arctic. Yes, we were just talking about family traditions. Something passed between them. A look. A moment of understanding that excluded me entirely. Sophia's expression grew cautious, wary in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child dealing with schoolyard bullies. Is everything okay? Derek joined us, wrapping his arm around Sophia's waist in a gesture that was both protective and unconscious. Everything's perfect, I said firmly. Dinner's ready. Everyone to the dining room. The dining room table looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years. I sat at the head, where George used to sit when he was alive. David and Karen sat to my right with their children. Michael and Lisa sat to my left with theirs. Jennifer and Paul and Emma filled in the middle, and Sophia and Derek sat at the other end, closest to the kitchen so they could help serve and clear dishes. The same seats we'd all occupied for years. The same arrangement that had worked perfectly well for 2 decades. Patricia, as Derek's mother and a guest in my home, sat between Jennifer and Michael, in the chair that had belonged to George's mother when she was alive. For the first half hour, everything went smoothly. We passed dishes, filled plates, caught up on family news. David told us about his promotion at work. Michael shared stories from his recent business trip to Seattle. Jennifer updated everyone on Emma's college applications. And how's residency going, Sophia? Lisa asked. Derek was telling us you're thinking about specializing in pediatrics like him. I'm considering it, Sophia said. I love working with children, but I'm also interested in family medicine. I want to do a few more rotations before I decide. That's smart, Michael said. Take your time, figure out what really interests you. Spoken like someone who changed his major 4 times in college, Jennifer teased. Hey, I was exploring my options. Everyone laughed, and I felt myself relax for the first time since Patricia's phone call that morning. This was what Thanksgiving was supposed to be. Family together, sharing food and stories and the comfortable teasing that comes from years of shared history. Then Patricia opened her mouth. It's wonderful that Sophia has so many career options, she said, and her tone was perfectly pleasant, perfectly conversational. Of course, it must be nice not having to worry about carrying on the family business or maintaining family traditions. The table went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people focusing on their food, but the tense, breath-holding quiet of people who sense danger but aren't sure where it's coming from. I'm sorry? Sophia said. Oh, I just meant that being adopted gives you a certain freedom that the biological children don't have. You can choose your own path without feeling obligated to honor family legacy. David cleared his throat. Patricia, I don't think. I mean, it must be refreshing, Patricia continued, her voice still pleasant, still conversational, not having to live up to family expectations or worry about disappointing your ancestors. Patricia, I said quietly, that's enough. I'm just making conversation, Margaret. I think it's wonderful that Sophia gets to be her own person without all the pressure that comes with being a real family member. The word hung in the air like a curse. Real. As if 23 years of love and laughter and shared memories were somehow less authentic than an accident of genetics. Sophia set down her fork very carefully. I'm sorry, what did you just say? Oh, don't misunderstand me, dear. I think adoption is a beautiful thing. I'm just saying that it gives you certain advantages that the biological children don't have. What advantages would those be? Patricia smiled, and I recognized it as the same smile she'd given me at Sophia's wedding, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Well, for instance, you don't have to worry about inheritance issues or family property or carrying on bloodlines. You get all the benefits of being part of the family without any of the real responsibilities. The real responsibilities, Sophia repeated, and her voice was dangerously quiet. Patricia, stop, Derek said, but his mother wasn't finished. I mean, let's be honest about what we're talking about here. When Margaret and George die, God forbid, but eventually, the family assets will go to their biological children. As they should. That's how inheritance works. Blood to blood. The table erupted. Are you out of your mind? Jennifer stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. Mom, what the hell? David was staring at his wife in horror. Patricia, that's completely inappropriate, Michael said. But Patricia wasn't done. She was looking directly at Sophia now, her pleasant mask finally slipping away to reveal something much uglier underneath. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking but is too polite to say out loud. She's not even blood. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the living room, the furnace cycling on in the basement, the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. Sophia was staring at Patricia with an expression I'd never seen before. Not hurt, not anger, but something colder and more dangerous. You're right, she said finally, her voice perfectly calm. I'm not blood. Sophia, I started, but she held up a hand to stop me. No, she's absolutely right. I'm not connected to this family by blood. I'm connected by something much stronger. She stood up, and everyone at the table watched her with the fascination of people witnessing a car accident. I'm connected by choice. Every single day for 23 years I chose this family, and they chose me. When I was 6 and had nightmares about my birth parents dying, Mama chose to sleep on the floor of my room until I felt safe again. When I was 13 and kids at school made fun of me for being adopted, Papa chose to spend his entire Saturday driving around to every one of those kids' houses to have conversations with their parents. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each of her siblings. When I was 16 and wanted to quit school because organic chemistry was too hard, David chose to drive over here every Tuesday night for 3 months to tutor me. When I was 20 and doubted whether I was smart enough for medical school, Michael chose to help me write my application essays. When I was stressed about wedding planning, Jennifer chose to take over half the details so I could focus on my studies. Her voice was getting stronger, more passionate. And when I needed someone to walk me down the aisle because my birth father was dead, every single man in this family volunteered. I chose Papa because he earned that honor, not because we shared DNA. She turned to look directly at Patricia. So you're absolutely right. I'm not blood. I'm something better. I'm chosen family. And the difference between us is that nobody in this family had to choose you. You came with Derek, but everyone here chose me again and again for 23 years. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Tommy, David's 6-year-old, spoke into the quiet. Aunt Sophia, are you okay? Sophia's angry expression softened immediately. I'm okay, sweetie. Aunt Sophia just needed to explain something to Mrs. Derek's mom. She made you sad. A little bit. But I'm not sad anymore. Good, because it's Thanksgiving and nobody should be sad on Thanksgiving. You're absolutely right. Patricia looked around the table at the faces staring back at her, some angry, some disgusted, all unified in their judgment of what she'd just done. I didn't mean to upset anyone, she said, but her tone suggested she wasn't particularly sorry about it. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You meant to hurt my daughter in my house on Thanksgiving, and you succeeded. Margaret, I was simply pointing out. You were simply being cruel to a young woman who has never done anything to deserve it. I was being realistic about family dynamics and inheritance law. You were being a bitch, Jennifer said flatly. Jennifer, David hissed. No, I'm not apologizing for that. She was being a bitch to our sister, and I'm going to call it what it is. Patricia's face flushed red. I don't have to sit here and listen to this kind of language. Then leave, Michael said. Nobody's stopping you. Derek? Patricia looked to her son for support. Derek was staring at his plate, his jaw clenched tight. When he looked up, his expression was pained but resolute. Mom, you need to apologize to Sophia. I will not. I said nothing that wasn't true. You said things that were cruel and unnecessary and completely out of line. Derek, surely you understand the importance of maintaining proper family boundaries? The only boundary that was crossed here was yours, Derek said, and his voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. Sophia is my wife. This is her family. You don't get to decide who belongs and who doesn't. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I can see I'm not welcome here. You were welcome until you decided to attack my daughter, I said. Your adopted daughter. My daughter, I repeated firmly. Period. Patricia gathered her purse and coat with theatrical dignity. Derek, when you're ready to have an adult conversation about family realities, you can call me. Don't hold your breath, he replied. She headed toward the front door, then paused and turned back. This conversation isn't over, she said, looking directly at Sophia. There are legal realities about inheritance and family assets that can't be changed by sentiment and wishful thinking. That's when the doorbell rang. We all looked at each other in confusion. Everyone who was supposed to be at Thanksgiving dinner was already here, minus Patricia, who was standing in our living room making threats. Are you expecting someone else, Mom? David asked. No, I said, walking toward the front door. I have no idea who that could be. I opened the door to find a man in his 60s, well-dressed in a dark suit, holding a briefcase and wearing the kind of serious expression that usually accompanies bad news. Mrs. Margaret Summers? Yes? My name is Judge William Morrison. I'm sorry to disturb your holiday, but I need to speak with you about some urgent legal matters regarding your family. I stared at him, my brain struggling to process why a judge would be standing on my doorstep on Thanksgiving afternoon. I'm sorry, what legal matters? It concerns your daughter Sophia, your late husband George, and some information that has recently come to light about her adoption and inheritance rights. Behind me, I heard Patricia's sharp intake of breath. May I come in? Judge Morrison asked. This is a conversation that affects everyone in your immediate family. I stepped aside to let him into the house, my heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Whatever this was about, I had a feeling our family was about to change forever. Chapter 3. The Truth That Changes Everything. Judge Morrison stood in our living room, briefcase in hand, looking around at the remnants of our interrupted Thanksgiving dinner, with an expression that managed to be both apologetic and gravely serious. I'm truly sorry to intrude on your family gathering, he said, but the timing of this matter was unfortunately out of my control. What exactly is this about? Derek asked, moving protectively closer to Sophia. It concerns a legal investigation that has been ongoing for the past 6 months, involving fraudulent adoption records, estate fraud, and the systematic theft of inheritance funds spanning more than 2 decades. The room went completely silent. Even the children, who had been whispering among themselves, seemed to sense that something momentous was happening. I'm afraid I don't understand, I said, though a cold dread was already settling in my stomach. Judge Morrison opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mrs. Summers, what I'm about to tell you will likely come as a shock. We have reason to believe that Sophia's adoption was facilitated through fraudulent means, and that she may be entitled to a significant inheritance that has been deliberately concealed from her for 23 years. Patricia, who had been edging toward the door, suddenly stopped moving. I'm sorry, Sophia said, but I think there's been some mistake. My adoption was completely legal. My birth parents died in a car accident, and they had named Margaret and George as my guardians in their wills. That's partially correct, Judge Morrison said gently. Your birth parents did die in a car accident, and they did name the Summers family as your guardians. But there are other aspects of your situation that were not disclosed at the time of your adoption. He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Linda and Robert Chen were not just young parents who died tragically. Robert Chen was the sole heir to a manufacturing fortune built by his immigrant grandfather. At the time of his death, Robert's estate was valued at approximately $12 million. The number hung in the air like something tangible, impossible to ignore or rationalize away. $12 million, Michael repeated slowly. That money should have been held in trust for Sophia until she reached the age of majority, Judge Morrison continued. Instead, it disappeared into a complex web of legal maneuvers and fraudulent transactions. But we never heard anything about any inheritance, I said. The lawyers who handled Linda and Robert's estate said they had minimal assets. Some life insurance, a small savings account, nothing significant. That's because the lawyers you dealt with were not the primary estate attorneys. They were hired specifically to handle the guardianship transfer while the real estate was being liquidated by other parties. Judge Morrison pulled out another document and handed it to me. This is a copy of Robert Chen's original will, filed with the probate court in 1999. As you can see, it explicitly states that all assets are to be held in trust for his daughter Sophia until her 25th birthday, at which point she would inherit the full estate. I read the document with shaking hands, the legal language swimming before my eyes. But the numbers were clear enough. $12 million, plus 23 years of investment returns and compound interest. I don't understand, I said. If this inheritance existed, why didn't we know about it? Why didn't someone contact us? Judge Morrison's expression grew even more serious. Because certain parties had a vested interest in making sure you never found out. He pulled out a photograph and placed it on the coffee table where everyone could see it. It showed a man in his 50s, well-dressed, standing in front of what looked like a law office. Patricia made a small, strangled sound. This is Harold Patterson, the attorney who was appointed as executor of Robert Chen's estate. Over the past 23 years, Mr. Patterson has been systematically embezzling from Sophia's trust fund while filing false reports with the court, claiming that efforts to locate the beneficiary had been unsuccessful. But we were right here, Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. We've lived in the same house for 23 years. How could they not find us? They weren't looking for you, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Patterson had convinced the court that the guardians named in Robert's will were either deceased or had refused custody, and that the child had been placed with an unrelated adoptive family whose identity was sealed for privacy reasons. David leaned forward, his business training kicking in. So this Patterson guy has been stealing from Sophia's trust for over 2 decades? Approximately $847,000 per year in fraudulent withdrawals, plus the theft of investment returns that should have grown the principal significantly. We estimate that Sophia's current inheritance, if properly managed, should be worth approximately $38 million. The room erupted in gasps and whispered conversations, but I was focused on Patricia, who had gone completely white and was gripping the back of a chair like she needed it for support. Judge Morrison, I said slowly, how did this fraud finally come to light? An anonymous tip was received by the State Attorney General's office 6 months ago. Someone provided detailed financial records showing the pattern of fraudulent withdrawals, along with evidence that Mr. Patterson had been working with accomplices to conceal the theft. He paused, looking around the room before continuing. The investigation revealed that Mr. Patterson was not working alone. He had at least one co-conspirator who had personal knowledge of Sophia's whereabouts and family situation. Patricia made another small sound, and I saw Derek turn to look at her with growing suspicion. Judge Morrison, Jennifer said, are you saying that someone in our family was involved in this? I'm saying that someone with intimate knowledge of this family's circumstances provided information that helped facilitate the ongoing fraud. The pieces were starting to come together in my mind, forming a picture so ugly and unthinkable that I wanted to reject it entirely. Patricia, I said quietly, do you know Harold Patterson? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her face told the entire story. Oh my God, Derek breathed. Mom, what did you do? I didn't do anything wrong, Patricia said, but her voice was shaking. I was protecting our family's interests. Our family's interests? Derek's voice was rising. What the hell does that mean? Judge Morrison pulled out another document. Mrs. Patricia Reynolds, formerly Patricia Patterson, is Harold Patterson's daughter. She has been receiving payments from the fraudulent withdrawals for the past 15 years, since she first made contact with your family. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. 15 years? Sophia said slowly. You've known about my inheritance for 15 years? Patricia's composure finally cracked. You don't understand. That money was just sitting there doing nothing. You had a good life with the Summers family. You didn't need it. It wasn't your decision to make, Derek shouted. It wasn't even her money, Michael added. I was protecting everyone, Patricia said desperately. If Sophia had suddenly inherited millions of dollars, it would have changed everything. The family dynamics, Derek's relationship with her, everyone's expectations. I was keeping things stable. You were stealing, Jennifer said flatly. I was preventing complications. By taking money that belonged to my wife, Derek said, and his voice was so cold it could have frozen water. Money that should have paid for her medical school, that could have helped Margaret and George when George was sick, that belonged to our family. Your family, Patricia repeated bitterly. She's not even your blood family. There it is again, Sophia said, standing up. Not blood family. Do you know what you've done, Patricia? You've spent 15 years stealing from me while pretending to be my friend. You've watched me struggle through medical school, watched Margaret work extra jobs to help pay for my education, watched this entire family make sacrifices to support me, all while you were living off money that was mine. You wouldn't have had any of this if it weren't for me, Patricia snapped, gesturing around the room. You wouldn't have this family, this upbringing, these opportunities. I could have had you removed from this home at any time. What are you talking about? I demanded. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. There's more. Mrs. Patterson's father didn't just steal from the trust fund. He also facilitated the original placement fraud. He pulled out one final document. Linda and Robert Chenswell named Margaret and George Summers as guardians, yes. But it also specified that Sophia should be told about her inheritance when she turned 18, and that she should have access to trust fund distributions for education and medical expenses throughout her childhood. We never received anything like that, I said. Because Harold Patterson convinced the court that the named guardians had declined custody. He then arranged for an alternative placement with a different family, a family that would be more cooperative with his long-term plans. The truth hit me like a physical blow. You mean we weren't supposed to get Sophia? No, you were always supposed to be her guardians. But Patricia's father planned to tell you that Sophia had been placed elsewhere, while telling the adoptive family that her birth parents had died without assets. That way, he could steal from the trust while no one knew to look for the money. So what happened? David asked. Linda's sister, Margaret, was more persistent than Harold Patterson expected. When she insisted on taking custody, he had to adjust his plan. He allowed the adoption to proceed, but concealed all information about the trust fund. And Patricia knew about this? Derek asked. Judge Morrison nodded. Patricia became aware of the situation approximately 15 years ago, when she began researching Derek's family background for what she said were security purposes. When she discovered that Sophia was the missing heiress her father had been stealing from, she made a deal with him. What kind of deal? I asked, though I was dreading the answer. She would keep Sophia's location secret and help maintain the fiction that the beneficiary couldn't be found. In exchange, she would receive a percentage of the stolen funds. How much? Sophia asked quietly. Over the past 15 years, approximately $4 million. The number landed like a bomb in the middle of the room. $4 million. Patricia had stolen $4 million from Sophia while watching her struggle through medical school, while criticizing our family for not being wealthy enough, while making snide comments about Sophia not being real family. Derek was staring at his mother like she was a stranger. $4 million. You've been living off $4 million that you stole from my wife. I didn't steal anything. My father was the executor of the estate. He had legal authority. He had legal authority to manage the trust for Sophia's benefit, Judge Morrison interrupted. Not to embezzle from it for his own family's gain. And you, Sophia said, looking directly at Patricia, have been coming to family dinners for 2 years, sitting at our table, eating our food, pretending to care about us, all while you were stealing from me. I do care about you. You care about keeping me quiet so you could keep stealing from me. Patricia's face contorted with something that looked like rage mixed with desperation. You have no idea what you're talking about. You've had a wonderful life. A loving family, a good education, a successful career. What more could you possibly want? I want the money my parents left for me. I want the money that should have helped Margaret and George raise me. I want the money that should have paid for my medical school so I didn't have to graduate with $200,000 in student loans. Student loans build character. And I want my family to be free from the financial stress they've endured for 23 years because they were raising a child without the resources that were meant to support that child. Patricia looked around the room at the faces staring back at her. Derek's horror, my fury, the kids' confusion, Sophia's cold determination. You can't prove any of this, she said finally. Judge Morrison smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. Actually, we can. When you made your anonymous tip to the Attorney General's office 6 months ago. I didn't make any anonymous tip. The call came from your cell phone, Mrs. Patterson. We have the records. Patricia went completely still. That's impossible. You called the fraud hotline on May 15th and provided detailed information about your father's embezzlement activities. You gave specific account numbers, withdrawal dates, and transaction details that only someone with intimate knowledge of the fraud could have known. Why would I do that? Why would I turn in my own father? Because, Judge Morrison said, pulling out one final document, Harold Patterson was diagnosed with terminal cancer in April. He told you he was going to confess and try to return the stolen funds to make peace with his conscience. You called the tip line to try to control the narrative and minimize your own involvement. The silence stretched so long I could hear the grandfather clock chiming the hour in the living room. Unfortunately for you, Judge Morrison continued, the phone records, bank records, and your father's written confession before his death last month provide a complete picture of the fraud, including your active participation for the past 15 years. Patricia's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into the nearest chair. What happens now? Derek asked quietly. Now, Mrs. Patterson will be arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud, grand theft, and money laundering. The stolen funds will be recovered and returned to Sophia, along with appropriate interest and damages. And Sophia gets her inheritance? All $38 million of it, plus whatever additional damages the court awards for the 23 years of financial hardship this family endured. I looked at Sophia, who was staring at Patricia with an expression I couldn't quite read. You know what the really sad part is? Sophia said finally. If you had just told the truth 15 years ago, if you had helped me claim my inheritance when you first found out about it, I would have shared it with this family. I would have made sure Margaret and George were comfortable in their retirement. I would have helped pay for my siblings' children's educations. I would have treated you like family because you were Derek's mother. She stood up and walked closer to Patricia. But instead, you chose to steal from me while making me feel like I didn't belong. You chose to watch this family struggle financially while you lived off money that was mine. You chose to spend 2 years telling me I wasn't real family while you were the fake one. Patricia looked up at her with something that might have been remorse. Sophia, No, you don't get to apologize now. You don't get to explain or justify or ask for forgiveness. You made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences. Judge Morrison closed his briefcase. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to come with me. You're under arrest. As Patricia was led away in handcuffs, protesting her innocence and begging Derek to help her, I found myself thinking about George and how much he would have loved to see this moment. Justice for Sophia. Vindication for our family. And proof once and for all that blood isn't what makes a family. Love is what makes a family. And love always wins in the end. Chapter 4. The New Beginning. 3 months later, I was sitting in the lawyer's office where Sophia was signing the final paperwork to claim her inheritance, watching my daughter become one of the wealthiest young women in Chicago. $38 million. The numbers still didn't feel real, even after months of legal proceedings and financial planning meetings and media coverage that had turned our family's story into a national news sensation. "The last signature goes here," the attorney said, pointing to a line on the final document. "And then it's official." Sophia signed her name with the same careful precision she used for everything else, then looked up at me with a smile. "Well, Mama, I guess I'm rich now." "You were always rich, sweetheart. Now you just have money too." The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media interviews, and financial planning. Patricia had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for her role in the fraud. Harold Patterson had died before he could be prosecuted, but his estate was being liquidated to pay restitution. Derek had filed for divorce the day after Thanksgiving, citing fraud, betrayal, and what he called fundamental incompatibility with basic human decency. He'd also resigned from the pediatric practice where Patricia had gotten him his position, wanting to make his own way in the world without any connection to his mother's crimes. "What are you going to do with all that money?" David had asked Sophia at our first family dinner after the inheritance was finalized. "I'm going to pay off my student loans," she'd said. "And then I'm going to pay off all of your student loans too." "Sophia, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. This money was supposed to help our family for the past 23 years. It's time it started doing that." She'd been true to her word. Student loans paid off for all 3 of her siblings. College funds established for all the grandchildren. The mortgage paid off on the house where she'd grown up, plus enough money set aside to ensure I'd never have to worry about finances again. "I want to establish a foundation," she told me as we left the lawyer's office that final day, "something that helps adoptive families who are struggling financially." "That's a beautiful idea. I want to call it the George and Linda Foundation, after Papa and my birth mother." He would have loved that. We walked to the parking garage in comfortable silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what had just happened. 23 years after her parents died, Sophia had finally received the inheritance they'd left for her. "Mama," she said as we reached our cars, "can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you think Linda and Robert would be proud of who I became?" I looked at this remarkable young woman who had been my daughter for more than half my life, who had survived betrayal and theft and cruelty with her integrity intact, who was using her newfound wealth to help others instead of seeking revenge. "Sweetheart, I think they'd be amazed. Not because of the money or the success or any of that, but because of who you are. Because of your kindness and your strength and your capacity to love people even when they don't deserve it." "Even Patricia?" "I said you had the capacity for it. I didn't say you were required to use it." She laughed, and the sound carried across the parking garage like music. "I love you, Mama." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." 6 months later, Sophia and Derek were married again in a simple ceremony in our backyard, the same place where they'd first exchanged vows. This time, there were no disapproving in-laws, no questions about family legitimacy, no undercurrents of resentment or financial anxiety. Just family, real family. The kind built on love and choice and decades of shared memories. During her maid of honor speech, Jennifer told a story about the first time 5-year-old Sophia had declared that she was going to be a doctor, so she could fix people who were broken like my first mommy and daddy were broken. "She was 5 years old," Jennifer said, looking out at the 50 guests gathered in our backyard. "And she already understood that healing people was the most important work anyone could do. 20 years later, she's doing exactly that. Not just as a doctor, but as a daughter, a sister, a wife, and now as someone who has the resources to heal financial wounds for families who need help." The George and Linda Foundation had been operational for 3 months by then, providing financial assistance to adoptive families, funding programs for children who had lost their parents, and supporting research into ethical adoption practices. "Some people inherit money," Jennifer continued. Sophia inherited something better. She inherited the capacity to turn pain into purpose, to transform betrayal into benevolence, and to prove that the strongest families are the ones we choose to build with love. As I listened to my daughter toast my other daughter, I thought about the conversation George and I had had in his hospital room all those years ago, when he'd made me promise to ensure the kids looked out for each other. I'd kept that promise, but more than that, they'd kept it for themselves. Even when one of their own was under attack, even when someone tried to diminish Sophia's place in our family, they'd rallied around her. They'd chosen love over blood, connection over genetics, loyalty over convenience. That night, after the reception ended and the guests went home, I found myself sitting on the back porch where George and I used to have our evening conversations. Sophia joined me, still in her wedding dress, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Thank you," she said, settling into the chair that had been George's. "For what?" "For everything. For taking me in when Linda and Robert died. For loving me like I was your own. For raising me to know the difference between family and relatives. You were my own from the moment I held you." I know, that's what made Patricia's words so ridiculous. She kept saying I wasn't blood family, like that mattered. Like love and loyalty and 23 years of shared life counted for nothing. Some people think genetics determine everything. They're wrong. You know what's funny? I got a letter from her last week. From prison. I turned to look at her. What did it say? She wanted to apologize. She said she realized she was wrong about family, and that she hoped someday I could forgive her. What did you think about that? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the garden where she'd played as a child, where we'd celebrated birthdays and graduations and now 2 weddings. "I think," she said finally, "that some people spend their whole lives not understanding what family really means. And I think I'm lucky that I was raised by people who understood it perfectly." She raised her champagne glass. "To chosen family." "To chosen family," I agreed. We sat there in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, watching the stars come out over the backyard where our family had grown and flourished and weathered storms that should have torn us apart, but only made us stronger. Sometimes blood is thicker than water. But sometimes love is thicker than blood. And love, as it turns out, always wins in the end. The end.